I do see this as a war between good, sort of good, getting good, and not so good against malignant evil. But since I'm sure you're aware, and the entire universe is aware of what's going on in our fair country here. Um,
What?
uh,
I've
speak
done my
peace to
best
me,
to
brother.
I've done my best to be oblivious my whole life, and I've succeeded.
That's a good point. So, right. So what what's funny? Well, it's not funny, but since the election, basically my phone has been like a heroin addiction. I mean, basically I was checking the headlines and the boosts at least every 5-10 minutes at certain points during my workday because of everything that was going on. And at a certain point, and I was thinking, this is getting ridiculous. And I wondered why I cared so much.
Well, I know why you cared so much. It's the old American, and you're dying.
Yeah,
It's
dying.
the yeah, dying.
I think dead.
You have to die to get there. I mean, if we're dead, you wouldn't be emotionally involved. I mean,
Yeah.
if it were dead, you would be well. So and let's put it this way: when I tell you about a revolution in the Congo,
Hmm.
your immediate thought is, "Oh, that's interesting."
Right.
You don't get excited about it, do you?
No, not really.
No, not really, because it's in the Congo. You don't really care about the Congo one way or the other.
Right.
You're not a committed Congolese. You're just not. If you were, you'd probably be much more excited about it, much more up in arms. But because you're not a committed Congolese, you're not particularly interested in Congolese politics. One,
Are you asserting that we're in the midst of a revolution?
I'd say we're in the beginning of a civil war. Now, I
The
hope I'm
third civil
wrong. Yeah, the third civil war. I hope I'm wrong, of course, but I hope that if I live so long, when we celebrate my 70th birthday, we can laugh at how silly I was 10 years ago.
war.
Obviously,
Right.
the senility was just catching into you then. Now, here in 2030, you're totally God. But in those days, even then, people could see you were
Toast.
going. You're very good health. But if I do have my wits about me, and if I am reading the signs of the times, as Vatican II advises us to, I I have to say, and I've written about it. This is no great deep dark secret. I've written about it in Crisis, and I've talked about it on my own show and in various other venues. Um, I thought in 2016 that a civil war had been delayed by 4 years,
Yes.
and that last year of Obama, people forget how desperate things were
I
with
don't. 2008.
Ferguson. Well, no, the last year.
Oh, I'm sorry. His first. Yeah. Well,
Uh,
in 2008 when he sold the country to the banks. But go
no,
ahead.
that was 2008.
Right.
If
Right. I'm
you
sorry.
if you remember 2015-16, or
Mm.
2015 in particular, 2016, this was when the black sheriff of Milwaukee declared
Hmm.
openly that the president of the United States had declared war on law enforcement.
Mm. Right.
This was the age of Ferguson.
Oh, right. Hmm.
But see, this doesn't come jump into your mind. How soon we forget. Baltimore, the mayor of Baltimore, was encouraging the rioters in that city. And I said to myself, and I said in public, that if the Trumpster does not win, we are going to have a civil war on our hands. And of course, friends of mine who I should always say left of center said, "Is that a threat?" I said, "No, it's not a threat. It's the way things are." I'll put this another way. If there's a guy who's bigger than me and stronger than me, not necessarily smarter, but bigger and stronger, and kind of slow, if I keep punching him, Sooner or later, he's going to belt me.
Did you see that one video of the obvious racist white kid just dropping the N bomb all over some guy in line behind him over and over again?
Yeah.
It became a meme because he used a twisted T and clocked the idiot racist kid and got him down on the ground. But it's to your point that at a certain point, the guy actually, the black guy behind him, I held a lot of respect. He held his peace in a blizzard of insult and straight in his face bigotry. But at a certain point, the twisted T.
You kind of lose it. And the thing is, uh, you know, everybody likes to feel their side are pure and wonderful. But that's never true in a civil war. Never.
No. Well,
And no, I mean, I do not care how laudable the goals may be. Human nature being what it is, fallen, every side always attracts riffraff. Now, obviously, if the cause is bad, it gets more riffraff than its fair share.
right.
But even if the cause is pure as pure can be, you're going to get riffraff. And
Yeah,
people
I
being
agree
what they
with you.
are,
I understand. Yeah, we're all
it's the way it
humans, and
is.
I put it this way, and I don't. We'll talk later about how we're about to lose every ability to talk to each other, but that I do see this as a war between good, sort of good, getting good, and not so good against malignant evil.
There certainly is that element, but there's something you got to bear in mind. It's just like with World War II. And this is a very good example of the complexity of human life. Now, prior to World War II, i.e., the interwar era, and you know what? We'll go back before World War One. As you know, in every country in Europe and in Latin America, in response both to the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution, a body of Catholic social theory and social teaching developed, as well as many, well, for want of a better word, as well as many Catholic political parties and movements. And in the Protestant countries, Northern Germany, Scandinavia, Britain, and so on, sort of vaguely cognate movements, especially because Catholics in those countries not being in a position.
What were they moving against? What was causing the movements?
Well, a combination of several things. Firstly, initially the French Revolution and the republicanism, hatred of the old order, of the church, of aristocracy, and so forth. But then, at the same time, with the rise of the Industrial Revolution and the creation of the urban proletariat, you had, on the one hand, these new industrialists and bankers who tended to be very, not all of them by any stretch, but a lot of them tended to be, in their own way, anti-monarchical, anti-church. I mean, who were the supporters of Planned Parenthood and Darwin? But the well-to-do who came from that sort of a background. But at the same time,
I have a certain group of people in my mind, though. Unfortunately,
no,
but
put it out of your mind. Put it out of your mind and stick with the narrative. You'll never remember the worst way to learn anything new is to not hear it.
Okay.
So the at the same time, the urban proletariat, who lived miserable lives. I mean, read your Charles Dickens and you'll understand.
Yeah.
This was one of the great ironies of our second Civil War.
Right.
Was the fact that people were yapping about freedom for the slaves, while the wage slaves in the northern factories were
just factory workers were just as bad, right?
Well,
I have an
worse.
interesting point on that later.
They were worse in a sense because the slave was a valuable item, and very often plantation owners would work very hard to keep them alive. That's
Yeah, but
why.
the factory employee was a throwaway, is what you're saying.
No, and if somebody was sick, they were fired. If they couldn't work, they were gone, and then their families could starve to death. You didn't see that in the sunny South. I mean, they had other problems. I'm not saying slavery is a good alternative. What I'm saying is that it was much more nasty and complex than people understand.
Right.
Into that terrible, terrible mix, both in America and um, in America and in Europe,
Hmm.
you had, well, this was where Marxism came from.
Right.
You got to bear in mind that it's rare that people decide, hey, I've got an idea. I'm going to come up with something evil just to destroy all that's good, true, and pure. Doesn't really happen like that.
Yeah,
On
it's
rare
incremental.
occasions, yes, and also there are two other things that work. There are a few people like that.
Hmm.
Not many. Not
Hmm.
many, but a few. And on the other hand, there's always the devil, who's always, and his
Right.
minions, who are always trying to
Right.
help us to our own destruction.
Absolutely. Right.
If he can't get us one way, he'll get us another.
Right.
Um, and if he's at work on you and me, you can be assured he's at work on every one of our brethren and sistren, whatever their
Like
type of condition.
in the devil of Daniel Webster, when Daniel Webster said, "I wish you were in my opponent's camp," and he goes, "Oh, I'm there too."
Yeah, yeah. That's exactly because he wants us any way he can get us. He doesn't care. He really doesn't care.
Hmm.
It's not like he's more. It's not like he's fonder of one sin than of another.
No, right. Whatever works.
He's Yeah, exactly what we used to call in the army economy of force.
Hmm.
He's
Hmm.
really into that. He really is. It's all for that. There's another old joke that he gets conservatives through lack of charity and liberals through lack of chastity. and,
That's a good one. Yes.
and, he, and he doesn't care. Long as you get to fry forever and he can laugh, he's good with that. But although someone asked
I
me
got.
once, if the devil came to you visibly with a temptation, what would your response to
Mhm.
him be? Before you start giving me advice, Mr. Satan, why don't you go straighten out your own relationship with God, then come back? Then you'll be in a position to advise me. But until then, you're kind of a failure when it comes to relationships.
Well, I think you're trying to give me a historic lesson on how it's not always black and white and good versus evil.
It's important to bear that in mind. It is good versus evil when it comes to ideas and first principles and so forth.
Right.
But when it comes to people, when it comes to the actual folk you encounter,
Hmm.
uh, the ideas don't change, but people's perceptions of them do. And since presumably we're trying to follow the God who prefers that people would live than die,
Hmm.
prefers that they do well than sin, well, we've got to try to go after them the way he did. Now, sometimes you have to drive the money changers out of the temple. There's no way out.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that. But those aren't the majority of situations that you'll find yourself in.
But
Moreover,
don't. I'm sorry to interrupt, Charles, but don't you find though that what's going on since the Epiphany, since the eighth, is sui generis? You're a historian, so you would have you would say no. This has happened
it's
over
not
and
sui
over.
generis, of
Okay.
course. And when it's happened in our time, but you don't care when it happens in the Congo. It's only important when it happens in your own home. But how is the Capitol building different from the Palais Populaire in Kinshasa?
Well, half the world is not interested in the Congo.
I
Half the world
repeat,
does not have. No, I don't
I,
mean
re-
interested in the
I,
sense that
re-
I'm a patriot and I live
I,
here. I mean in the
I,
sense.
I
Oh, go
repeat,
ahead. Okay.
perception,
Okay.
perception. You
Do you don't
see,
believe the United States is any kind of keystone nation? If it goes down, that
it's the most powerful nation in the world at the moment, but so was the Roman Empire.
yeah,
For
and
that matter, Austria-Hungary was the most powerful nation in Central Europe, and its destruction at our hands led to a power vacuum that gave us both Hitler and Stalin. Oh,
Right.
I'm not saying what we do isn't important.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
No. What I am saying is that you cannot allow your vision to be clouded by the fact that you happen to be there. And
Well, vision.
also,
Okay. Okay. Go
and
ahead.
also, you've got to remember, you know, as Americans, we were brought up with the idea of American exceptionalism, the
Mm-hmm.
idea that we were different, that we were the shining city on the hill, the last best hope of mankind,
Yeah. Yada yada. Mm-hmm.
yada yada, indeed. But we
Right.
all have that attitude with us, and the invasion of the Capitol feels like how do I put it? Like a catastrophic apocalyptic event. It's like the fall of Rome. Like St. Augustine wrote about in The City of God, and for the same reason, because the Romans felt the same way. When Rome was sacked by Alaric, they felt the world had come to an end. And St. Augustine wrote The City of God, which I recommend you read,
Mm-hmm.
precisely to remind them, no,
Not the end of the world.
no, no. It's annoying. It's upsetting. It's nothing we like.
Now, Charles,
All right,
it's
it is
on
the end of
that.
the world. It's awful. It's all going
No,
down.
no.
Is that
I
better?
agree. We shouldn't be panicking,
No,
but
I am.
let's not gloss over a few things. Since the 8th, they've suppressed 4 major conservative or populist nationalist uh, uh, internet uh, aggregators, etc.
Yeah, and I'm sure
YouTube,
they'll do more.
and also, let's not forget these people. I've always said the thing about it, if you let me rant.
It may well end up to be true to the punch.
Mhm.
It may well end up being like the Reichstag fire.
Yes,
Okay,
yeah, but
and
at least you know it seemed like they would run an orderly society. These people, they just want us to die.
well, yeah, but see, you got to bear a few things in mind. They're not very smart.
No, that's my up. I'll talk to you about that later, but that's my upside. Is I said this to my wife several times. I said, "Oh, they think they're masters of the universe, and all their plans are going to come to fruition."
No,
It's not the case, and I'm
it's
counting
not.
on their idiocy.
When you don't have to count too hard. See, it's funny. I had this conversation today with somebody.
Hmm.
I've got to explain something, and that my perception, if you will, of our masters, our elite class.
Hmm.
And bear in mind, when I say our elites, the leadership, the masters, it's not monolithic.
No, I understand.
It's not. Uh, I'll put this another way. I went to a military college, New Mexico Military Institute in beautiful Roswell, New Mexico.
Hmm.
Now, the alumni are an extremely varied bunch.
Hmm.
I mean, more than a lot of schools tend to be. Yet, there is a certain commonality. And if you know that an institute alumnus is in a given position, you can kind of figure he's got a certain set of values. Probably. Not
Hmm.
always, but probably. It doesn't mean that we get our orders from Roswell and we do what we're told. What it means is that we have a certain commonality of experience and ideas that most people who have never been there do not have.
Okay.
It's very important to understand that. So when I speak about our elites and so on, remember that for the most part, these are people who've had, they're a community of people who've had shared experiences, shared views, shared this, shared that. President Trump was certainly one of them. I mean, this is why, for instance, he had no problem with the whole gay thing.
Mm.
It's not
Right.
because he was a paid agent of the Comintern, uh, or that he was getting orders in the smoke-filled room. It's just that people from his place and class and so forth don't have trouble with that.
Right.
Just like people from other groups don't have problems with cockfighting.
Right. Right.
And again, I lived in Silmar, California, for a few years, and it's the cockfighting capital of the LA area. And to be
Yeah.
honest with you, I don't really have a problem with cockfighting.
I don't either. I don't
Now,
see what the big deal is. I own chickens, so it's like I get it. What? Why not
now,
have a little fun?
if I were the mayor of some town,
Hmm.
I probably would not really push to have cockfighting banned. Or if it were banned, I probably wouldn't be in favor of enforcing those particular laws. Why? Because I've been around in a place and a time where cockfighting just wasn't a big deal. I mean, frankly, I've never been to a cockfight, but
Right.
I really don't care anything about it, and I certainly am not keen on the police hunting down cockfighting.
But I don't think we're talking about cockfighting here.
No,
My personally,
we're not
go
talking
ahead.
about cockfighting. What we're talking about attitudes,
Hmm.
opinions and views, like most of them that most of us have, that are
Hmm.
not really carefully intellectually gone into. They're
Hmm.
just part of the milieu from which we come. That's an important word, milieu.
I get it.
Now,
Do you
the
say that
reason
it's
why,
some kind of excuse for them to be this way?
you say an excuse. It's
I'm
not a
trying.
question. It's not a question of an excuse. It's like if you talk to the doctor and he's trying to give a diagnosis,
Hmm.
and I say, "Well, he's got a broken leg." Oh, is that your excuse? He's got a broken leg. It
All
doesn't
right.
matter.
Sorry,
Yes, but what's the
Professor.
morality behind that broken leg? How did he break it?
All right,
It
Professor.
doesn't matter.
Sorry.
It's broken.
Go ahead. Slap my wrist.
It is that an excuse? Yes, he's got a broken leg, so he's not going to be running and jumping for you. I mean,
Well, it's an
again,
explanation, is what you're saying. It's not an excuse. It's an explanation.
it's yeah, of course.
Right.
And you can't if you don't understand why things are. This is one of the things that drives me crazy about people on our side
Hmm.
is that they think that if you understand something, you agree with it. I hate that. I really hate that more
No,
than I can tell you. Well, if you know so much about it, you must be for it. You know what? You're right.
no. I
Ignorance
don't
is
believe that.
best.
I
You
don't
may
think that.
not, but a lot of people do.
Yeah.
A lot of people do. I mean, oh, this sort of thing drives me mad. It really, really does. People, if there's one phrase I would like to rip out of everyone's mouths, it's, I heard that.
What? And put it in a sentence. What do you mean? I heard that.
I heard that Coudenhove Kalergi knew a Rothschild.
Where'd you hear it? Or is that they say? That's kind of like the they. You know what
Yeah.
they say.
Yes, I know what they say. That people who say they know what they say are stupid. I get it.
I get it.
I heard that.
Okay.
I
I
heard
heard
that
that.
people who say that are don't drive me crazy. It's late in the day.
I'm sorry, Charles. It wasn't my intention.
It's not you. I mean, especially these days, but in general, this kind of, of ever flowing imprecision
Right.
that thinks it
Right. That's
knows
a good line.
and
I'm writing
doesn't.
that down. Ever flowing imprecision. That's a good
It's
name for a rock band.
it's probably already been done. I'm not kidding. You would
Ever
A friend
flowing.
of mine actually asked me once to try to help him name a rock band.
Yeah.
You would be surprised how many of the weirdest names imaginable have already been taken. My
Well,
personal favorite is
I do
the
try
comfortable chair.
I do try not to flow into imprecision if I can help it. And that's sort of the reason I always end up cutting people off because I see that I asked the wrong question and I'm going in the wrong direction from what I actually asked. So I try to re-precise what I was saying. And
All right. Well, let's try this again, shall we?
okay, yes.
All right. Before you jump at me and say, "Is that an excuse?" It doesn't matter.
I,
Yes, it's an excuse. From now on, I'm excusing them. They're good. They're nice people, and that's my whole point, and that's what I'm trying to
well,
prove.
I regret I even said that. You got it. All right. It's not really what I meant, but okay.
So, we're trying to understand why things are the way they are.
Mhm.
It's not about excuses. It's not even about value judgments.
Mhm.
It's just a question of why things are as they are.
Okay.
All right?
Hmm.
Why did President Trump not have a problem with gay marriage? The reason is that in the milieu that he comes from,
Hmm.
it's just not a problem. It's not an issue. Just as I don't really have a problem with cockfighting.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying
What
that there's
about?
a moral equivalence. That's not my point.
I
I
understand.
don't think anybody with a brain is going to say that cockfighting is as great a sin as. No.
Right.
The point I'm trying to make is that we are influenced by the milieus whence we come, and they have a big effect on us. I have always said, and people have gotten really pissed off at me about this, but I don't care. People get pissed off at me constantly.
You
And
just
if
got
they,
pissed at me, and I didn't mean to.
well, indeed, indeed. But if it's that big of a problem, they can start paying me, and then I'll be nice.
Right.
But here's the deal. The deal is that uh, President Trump never really had what you would call an ideological center. He had a set of views. He had a. I mean, I believe he's a great sentimentalist.
Hmm.
I believe he loves America in the sense that everybody loved America when I was a boy.
Do you believe? Do you
You
believe he loved the deplorables,
know,
or was he playing us?
you know, I don't think the two are inseparable, and I think you're putting too much
That's
thought into it.
interesting.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I think you're putting too much thought into him. I mean, does a shopkeeper love his customers, or are they just a source of income to him?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is it can be both.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he really loves his customers, but not to the point of letting them take food for free.
Mm-hmm. I
I
see
mean,
your
he's fond of them, and I think that he, in some sense, it made him feel good to be their champion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It made him feel very good. The Mount Rushmore speech that everybody was so excited about.
Yeah.
You know, it was a good speech, but the thing that hit me about it was that it was the kind of thing that when I was a boy
They
was the
all said.
boiler. It was boilerplate.
Yeah.
Now it sounds like a radical call to
I
arms,
know,
but
right. That's how far
you
we've
know,
come.
that's how far we've come.
Yeah.
But in my day, in your day too, is the kind of thing that people would have said dedicating a bridge.
Right. Right. Well,
Which
that's interesting. Interesting you bring that up because the day of the Washington thing on the Epiphany, I listened to his speech while I was at lunch at work, and frankly, I knew we were in a lot of trouble with that speech because first off, one thing was missing, and I know he's not a humble person, but it didn't seem to me that he had the grasp of the humility of the situation we were in. He didn't he was still just giving the regular rah-rah speech and boasting about his accomplishments.
yeah,
But the people that showed up there were there for a completely different reason.
yeah,
The people that showed up there really feel, and I don't see it's inaccurate that everything that is American is about to get flushed if something doesn't happen, Mr. President. I don't think he
well,
grasped that. I don't
it
think he grasped that.
it may be he didn't. The problem is you really can't tell with him what's real and what's Memorex. And I mean, I'll give you an example. About a week ago, no longer, he gave a speech after turning down the uh, relief bill,
Right.
in which he said, if I don't like it, I'll refuse it, and then the next administration can deal with it, and that may
Right.
be me."
Right.
And when he said, "and that may be me,"
Hmm.
I thought, is he going to pull a rabbit out of his hat? What's he got moving? And then as we got closer to the time, I thought, well, maybe he's going to have some fun and games with the certification, at least to the degree that over the next 4 years, everybody's going to be able to, on his side, is going to be able to say that the whole thing's illegitimate. You know, we was robbed, which, you know, again, may or may not have happened. You know, I know a good deal
Well, we
about
can't we
voter
can't
fraud.
really discuss that, Charles, because then this video will not make it through YouTube. So we cannot discuss the absolutely incredible job the Harris administration did on their fantastic campaign, winning beyond any kind of precedent. It was just
Uh,
astronomically
don't
perfect.
worry. what I'm about to say, I don't think they really are in a position to censor,
Okay.
apart from bunnies and chicks
Okay.
and flowers, which is what I tend to put out when people get too rambunctious on my Facebook page.
Yeah.
But um, I know a lot about voter fraud, and the thing about voter fraud that's important to understand is that you can only do it when it's relatively close. Voter fraud in a safe seat doesn't work. You just can't do it. I mean, if you have, and most seats in Congress, to take as an example, are safe seats. They're always going to go Democrat or they're always going to go Republican. There's nothing you can do about it.
Hmm.
So voter fraud has to zero in on congressional seats, urban precincts, whatever, where they're paper thin or close to paper thin. Now, that being the case, to me, the real issue is always this: not whether or not those particular states have been treated, but the fact that the margins of so many states were thin enough to do it.
No comment.
That
I don't actually hold that theory that it was that thin. I just think they were that audacious.
again, I know a lot about the machinery of
All
the
right.
machinery of voter fraud. My tutor was the late lamented Jim Thomas, who was a New York Politico, and other than the Dominion thing, which I can't speak to because I don't know anything about it, but in terms of good old voter fraud,
Hmm.
I know a lot about it. And
Hmm.
the thing is, you need with vote. It's a funny thing because you do a lot of different things for the same election, but never too much of any one. So, for instance, if you're going to do the old test the vote machine
Oh, right.
deal,
Okay.
you only need to do 4 or 5 tests per machine.
Right.
You don't have to do a ton of them. But see, at the same time, you want to have the lost ballots. You want to have the extra ballots, but no more than 100.
Right.
Here and there and here, there and there. Because if you get too much, you'll get caught out. Now, and
No, you
but one of the
won't get
biggest,
called out.
well, you want there's no one to enforce it, which brings us
There's
to
no one
the
to
to the
call
other
it out. No press.
that see this brings us to the other issue
And we're
though.
not even allowed to talk. I have to talk on eggshells now. That's where we are already.
All I can say is that the lack of ID and the mail-in, how do I put this? It's almost an invitation. And I will say this much too: the charge that presenting ID for that particular function is racist. If that's true, then it's racist to drive a car because you have to have a license, and it's racist to get money out of a bank because you've got to present identification. And for that matter, it's racist to travel outside the country because you've got to use a passport. Obviously,
Well,
travel should be banned.
to your previous point about perception, I got news for you. Basically, what happened in Georgia with the two senators running off and what's going to happen in the future, I'm not going to vote. What's the point? As far as I can see, they've canceled the whole concept out.
Well,
Now, that's just my opinion, YouTube.
this brings us back. This brings us back to my initial point.
Hmm.
That is that what I foresee happening
Hmm.
over the next 4 years is a ton of people feeling precisely the way you are.
Hmm.
If the Harris administration makes good on their threats to pack the court, produce 3 more states, etc., basically to ensure a dominance and supremacy.
For a century at least.
Well, that's their dream, but nothing lasts that long. But unfortunately, they don't know any history. And more of that in a moment.
Okay.
Um,
That's what I'm counting on. Go ahead.
That really is the ace in the hole. See,
Hmm.
what none of these people ever understand is that not only are they going to die, but they're going to
Right.
leave people behind them
Pelosi's
who,
80 some years old, right? But go ahead.
yeah, not only are they going to die, but the people they leave behind them are going to be even more incompetent than they are because they've created a culture of stupidity. Mutatis mutandis, it's a little bit like within the church. Prior to
Mm-hmm.
Vatican II, you had some really wicked folk like Karl Rahner, who were
Mm-hmm.
brilliant in terms of their training and their knowledge. But
Mm-hmm.
by their very actions, they ensured that the level of education within the church would never be as high as it had been in their day. And sure enough, there are very, very few people, if any people today on the Catholic scene, who have the kind of education that a Karl Rahner or an Yves Congar had. They just don't. They don't have the Latin. They don't have the Greek. They don't. So that's why their successor, how do I put it? The successors of their opponents are very aware of their lack and try to make up for it. But their own successors have the arrogance of success and don't bother trying to make up for what they don't have. So I digress. Um, that's what they think. The problem is that in reality, especially because of the events of the past summer, they have woken up something in this country which probably they
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't have done. And that's something that they've woken up. We got a taste of on the Epiphany,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll have a lot more tastes of it before the thing is done.
Well, there's a friend of mine who's on Facebook. He's from Spain, and he was involved in the last days of the Soviet Union as he was on, a dissenter and involved in trying to get rid of communism in Russia directly. He knew Solzhenitsyn as a mentor and a direct friend. And he spoke to me about it, and he said basically that without leadership, we're just like what happened on the Epiphany in Washington. It's just some kind of rabble that can't get any traction, that will just look bad, and our enemies will be able to even build further on our failing. Without we need, and this gets to a point I did all day think I wanted to ask you about because of the American spirit, which is both revolutionary and patriotic and conservative. So revolutionary and conservative doesn't seem to work.
It doesn't actually, and there were other things going on in our country that helped keep that in stasis. There was a shared
Right. So
moral.
again, just real quick to finish my point, and then I'll let you go, because leadership without any kind of Washington or Robert E. Lee or so when you and I have already discussed that there's possible, we believe there's a civil war coming. I
Yeah.
don't see how without leadership. Trump was the
Oh,
last thing we had that could even be described as a leadership for this feeling that got awoken you're talking about. So just an
I
awoken feeling is not going to help us.
no, the feeling won't help, but a leader will arise. Have no fear.
Mm.
I don't know who he is, but a leader will arise. He always does. There's probably nobody we know at the moment. But remember, Hitler was a corporal.
Yeah, but do they always have
Mussolini.
to be evil? I mean, can we have a good leader arise?
The
A good
problem,
strong man?
not until we get. Here's the problem. When an order is crumbling,
Mm-hmm.
the very fact that you need a strong man, need in quotes,
Right.
means that the whole situation is kind of screwed up.
Right.
Now, if we had other traditions, if we had something else at our back,
Americans,
maybe,
you mean?
yeah,
You mean
maybe.
America?
But I mean, what we're likely to get is not a Hitler, but a Cromwell.
A Cromwell. How so? I'm
Well, I
sorry. I'm not.
expect
I'm not. I know Cromwell was kind of a bad guy, but I don't really actually know a lot
he
about
was,
Cromwell.
he was a bad guy. I mean, he was a good guy compared to everybody else. I mean, I don't mean then. I don't
Yeah.
mean then. I mean,
All
you
right.
compare it to Hitler or Stalin, he was a good
Yeah.
guy.
It's better. He'd be
But
better off.
in terms of what an American strongman would look like, I suspect several things. One, I mean, Huey Long also comes to mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The Bonaparte of the Bayous.
Right.
What's that?
I know some about Huey Long. I agree, but he seemed to be a good guy to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Corrupt.
Well, I would
Listen,
say,
corrupt. I'm not going to say pure, but like,
well, let's say this about that. He was the only politician on the scene until he was killed that FDR
mhm,
was afraid of.
right.
And for FDR to be afraid of a Politico, everybody else FDR could handle, not Huey
I
Long.
guess my bias is towards populists. I guess I
Well,
have that bias. I'll admit to it.
no, well, we'll see what it produces. I mean, the problem with populists is that they are appealing to people who are easily swayed.
Oh, come on. I'm not easily swayed. I'm just saying I like
But
people.
I like people too, but I accept them for what they are. I mean, they're all fallen. You could
I'd
have
say we were.
you could have rotten, decadent oligarchs, or you could have wild, uncontrollable mobs. Here's your choice:
Oh, come
rednecks
on,
or
man. That's not
rednecks,
populism.
rednecks and Chardonnay swillers. That's what you got to choose
I
from.
think you've been breathing. I think you've been breathing that esoteric college air too long. That's not all
Well,
populists. We're not mob warriors. How many
it's not
times
that.
have we took? I understand. I'm just poking at you
No,
back. But I mean,
here's
we've had several of these things in Washington with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of deplorables, no violence,
no.
and
Well, what
so
made
it's
this
not that
different?
we're a mad mob.
What made this different, really, I think, is that the president led his supporters to believe that something was going to be happening,
Right? No, I agree with that. That was
and
a
nothing
complete no. That
and
was a
nothing did. And I
only
think,
bad things did. Like
well, yeah,
Pence betrayed them as they
I,
see it.
I meant
Right.
as they see it, and I mean,
Yeah.
and for Pence, uh, again, I hate to try to put myself in the other man's shoes. That we all know that's horrible, but pretending for a second that it's not terrible. Can you imagine being the president of the Senate and having the Capitol building invaded? That hasn't happened since the War of 1812. I mean,
Do you think there was any? Do you think our fearless oligarchs took away any kind of? Maybe we better pay a little more attention to the people, or do you think they took it? That's it. These people gotta go. We're crushing them. How do you think that
I
went
would
over with the Senate?
I would hope the first,
Right.
but I kind of suspect the second. And the thing that
Yes.
really got me more than anything else is that they got into Nancy Pelosi's office.
Hmm.
Instead of ransacking it or
Hmm.
stealing everything, they left a
Hmm.
note.
Yes. What was the note? I don't
We
remember.
won't back down.
Oh.
But I mean, I thought to myself, man, if I'd have been there in the spur of the moment, let me tell you, the Wicked Witch of the West's office would be trash.
Yeah.
I'd have ransacked anything. They
Yeah,
were
well, we're
better
not
behaved.
criminals, you see, Charles. We are civilized people. We try to get our point across without as much little damage as possible.
They were better behaved than I would have been in Nancy Pelosi's office.
Well, they did take her laptop, from what I understand, and so there
Now
is some
that
hope.
that would be interesting to see what comes out of that. Maybe the address to a good bootleg beautician, and maybe we'll all be able to get tickets to the French Laundry. Where her nephew Gavin Newsom was.
Well, you know that on our side, the populist nationalist side, that our feeling on their corruption is not stupid things like that. We feel there's like this really evil, satanic, pedophilic, wicked thing
And those are
that
the nice
and
guys.
and those are the real bad guys, and that's what we feel most of these people are, is, as our Lord said, a den of vipers. I mean, these aren't.
Well, I can tell you when I worked in Washington in the summer of '82 during the
Hmm.
Great Page scandals, the
Hmm.
real summer of love. Uh, anyway,
Yeah.
suffice to say that uh, the Capitol building. I mean, I'm sorry about the 4 people who got killed, but the
Hmm.
Capitol building itself was not damaged, and the even the paintings and so on. The historic stuff was left alone, for which I'm grateful.
Well, that's
Uh,
because it was deplorables and not Antifa or
oh yeah, I mean, if that had been Santa Monica Boulevard in L.A. in the summer,
yeah,
the whole place would have been torched. But
right. And
it
the
wasn't.
press wouldn't even reported it.
Well, there's that. And of course, this is one of the things too that I've been saying over and over on Facebook and Twitter and so on, that if it was a mob that invaded the Capitol, then they were mobs that burned down so many streets in my hometown.
Mhm.
If, on the other hand, those mobs in LA were actually peaceful demonstrators, and so are the people at
Mhm.
the Capitol. You can't have it both ways. At any rate, oh, and by the way, although
Mhm.
I'm unhappy that our congressmen were inconvenienced, but I'd love to see a similar show of sympathy for all of the shopkeepers and their employees who were burned out across the summer.
Oh yeah,
But
the
uh,
hypocrisy is so
but
pure. I
but
mean,
you know,
pure.
I know that's a lot to ask for anyone. I will say though that um, to go back to what we were saying before, there will be um, a tightening up of communications, an attempt to keep the deplorables from communicating.
Hmm.
And the downside to that, just like excluding them from the political process, is that they will feel that there's only one means of redress, and that means of redress will be violent. Now, I would not be surprised to see large portions of our country become virtually ungovernable. And from that chaos
That's our new name. We're going to go from deplorable to the ungovernables.
to the
But
ungovernables.
there's a player in here that we haven't mentioned yet that I've wanted to mention to you that I noticed that you don't, and that is the Chi-Coms. The Chinese
Ah,
Communist Party is not a non-entity in any of this.
I no, I haven't mentioned the Chi-Coms for several reasons. One,
Okay.
uh, although they are a factor, they wouldn't be a factor if we were together. To put this another way, if your body is healthy, if earlier you were saying you're talking about excuses. Well, if
Say
you're
it again.
drinking,
I won't
no,
say.
it's all right. It's all right. If you're drinking and smoking and all that, uh, and doing various other things that weaken your constitution,
Mhm.
um, you probably get all kinds of problems and diseases you wouldn't have gotten if you hadn't. STDs come to mind. Anyway,
Right.
point is
Right.
that uh, were we a healthy country, a healthy body
Are you
politic?
saying that they were simply opportunistic? The
Yeah,
Chinese came in opportunistically on us.
absolutely. Not unlike COVID. They're extremely.
See, COVID is their thing.
It's
It's almost as if, remember, look at the timeline. The minute Trump really puts the hammer on Chinese trade in America, that's when all this happens. And
well.
the
You got to remember.
Chinese, for all their faults, there's one thing they don't want people messing with is their money.
No, they don't. But you got to remember something else about the Chinese, and that is because, how do I put this? Communism really destroys any sense of civil responsibility. It wrecks a country in a lot of different ways. And I know because I've traveled a lot in Eastern Europe and I've
Hmm.
seen
Yeah, right.
it's had actually some positive effects in the sense that they don't want to go through that again.
Yeah, in Eastern Europe, but it seems the
Yeah,
Chinese have a lock on it.
well, that's because they haven't gotten free of it yet. The thing is that the negative piece that they've still got in Eastern Europe, and it's a big deal in China,
Hmm.
is a lack of a sense of civic responsibility.
Right.
So, just before the COVID broke out,
Hmm.
I remember
Or was
very
sent
clearly,
out. But go ahead. Go
I
ahead. I'm
remember
sorry.
very clearly in Wuhan,
Hmm.
there was a small news item that I thought was very interesting. One of the doctors at the Wuhan laboratory had been arrested
Hmm.
for selling lab animals to the Wuhan food market.
Hmm.
Now stop and think about that. They were forbidden to do that. You're supposed to destroy them because, of course, lab animals are what? They're carriers of diseases.
Sure.
But this guy, good communist, no ethics, makes some money. And of course, he's not getting paid all that much anyway. So he gets some extra money selling lab animals to the food market. And Chinese cuisine being what it is, just about anything's edible.
Mm-hmm.
It makes perfect sense to me that that thing might well have been a weaponized virus, shall we say,
Mm-hmm.
but it got out into the general populace because through being sold in through the sale of lab animals. You eat those things, or even actually before you eat them, because you don't know that it goes through food, but you could easily have picked it up while they were still alive, sitting in the market. And we do know that it caused tremendous devastation in China. You know what else we know? We know that their statistics that they're giving the WHO at the moment are lies.
Well, everything they say is lies. They're communists. They don't have to have truth.
Well, this
It's
absolutely, but
irrelevant. Truth is
if
power.
you
Power
go
is truth.
if you go to they've got this worldwide statistics on the COVID. Go to
Mm-hmm.
China and you'll see there's virtually no COVID in China right now, which is simply impossible. It's just not, and it
Well,
contradicts everything.
the issue with COVID, Charles, isn't cases. It's morbidity. And
Yeah,
it's not, there's no morbidity with, not no morbidity, there's no, I'm sorry, there's no lethality with this disease that
no,
warrants the literal destruction in less than a year of the entire Western civil rights situation. I mean,
no,
basically.
there isn't. And the thing that I find interesting about this, see, I'm old enough to have lived through the last two pandemics.
Mm-hmm.
So funny thing about pandemics, after they're gone, people don't really remember them very well. They don't talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
My brother and I were discussing. He has COVID, by the way. My brother Andre. So
Well, I'm
does
sorry
half the
for
family. No, thanks.
How is he
It's
feeling?
not that bad.
No, it's a
He's
flu.
better than he was. Well, he's the Coulombe. It just gives him more reason to hate everybody. But anyway, as I was saying
Did
before I
you say
interrupted,
that out loud?
what a terrible thing to say. No, we're a
Love it.
nice people. We're a
Love it.
nice family. We're a nice
No, that's
family.
how
We really
brothers
are.
are. Go ahead.
No. I didn't say gives him. I mean, let's put it this way. If I had it, I'd feel exactly the same way. Just gives me another reason to hate everybody. But at any rate, no, the thing is that, well, one of our jokes is that we say in our family that it's better to assign blame than to actually get anything done. But at any rate, we're not alone in that, by the way. But the thing is that I was discussing this with him, and we came equipped with a lot of grandparents and great uncles and aunts, and they would talk about the two wars, they would talk about the Depression and so forth.
Flu, Spanish
They never
flu.
really
Oh no, they
all
don't
that.
talk about.
They never really talked about the pandemic in 1918. They talked about everything else, but not that. And then similarly, until this came up, he and I had never really discussed either the Hong Kong flu or the swine flu, and we both lived through it
Right. I
in
remember that.
'69 and '76.
I remember
People were getting,
76.
what's that?
But go ahead. I remember 76. I wasn't that old.
Was
69. I was 4.
see, 69, people were getting sick right and left, and a lot of people died. And there was no vaccination. We didn't have it in those days. You just, it came and it went. You washed your hands. You didn't eat off other people's plates, and it passed. Similarly with the swine flu, um, that thing came, and then they had just come in with vaccinations. They said, "Well, we've got a vaccination for this thing." Half the people who got it got sick from Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I remember that, but it's interesting that until this time, he and I never discussed those two past pandemics.
No, because they're dealt with the way we all humans are supposed to deal with diseases. We're supposed to just get herd immunity and move on.
Which is what we did. This time, it's been turned.
Right, this time. Right, go ahead.
This time it's different, and I think there are a number of contributing causes, not necessarily excuses, but contributing causes to the way our masters dealt with them.
Forgive as you are forgiven, Charles.
What's that? Sorry?
Forgive as you are forgiven.
No, aside blame, then decide. But the first thing is to bear in mind that our elites are secular people. And for
Yes,
them, death
absolutely.
is the worst
Worse
thing
than
that
that.
can happen.
Yes,
Nothing is worse
I
than
do
that.
get that. I do get that. 1,000%. Yep.
That's the first problem. The second problem is that they're not very smart.
Nope.
They don't know a lot of history. They don't know a lot of anything. And this was the current generation of leaders' first real challenge of any great import.
It's true.
This is the first real big world crisis that the current
Right.
generation of leaders have really had to deal with without adult supervision. And they're really not very good at it. They really.
Well, no, they never will be because they don't have our Lord. They don't have any logos, as Michael
Well,
Jones would say. They don't have any prudence.
they don't have any supernatural graces, but you see they're even deficient in the natural ones.
Yes.
As human beings, they're kind of poor prospects. And the
But they're
reason
in charge.
I
See,
know.
they are up there. How did they get there with such idiocy and such cravenness? I don't know. I never understood. Well, I guess I
No,
never will
because
understand.
firstly, because you're under the misapprehension that our leadership are elected.
Right. What? We just got done
The
saying. Go ahead.
Well, it's important to bear that in mind, and they're not the men their fathers were. I mean, they just aren't. If you look at
Or mothers, right?
uh, now, you
Or
frozen. Uh-huh.
I'm here.
All right.
Okay. Or their mothers.
Or their mothers. They're not the men their mothers were, certainly. But I'm sure that's true. But
Did that come out loud?
I don't know.
That was a
I
good
don't
one.
know. Yeah, it really is. They're not the men their mothers, which is certainly true. Uh, but they're very. And remember too that they're not a fixed group. Um, Families pass in and out of the leadership. New ones come in, old ones go downhill. Uh, Especially in our country, it's kind of fluid. Um, but the problem is that they have gone through the same dumbing down process that everyone else has. This is why I brought up Bronner and people like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because you
Right,
see
right,
the
right, right.
church. This
Right.
is what I was getting to. Um, they have also been dumbed down the way everybody else has. And remember something else about history. Every important historical event is a perfect storm. Had all of the different aspects not been present, many of them not related to each other, some of them related, but not all. Had they not all happened as they did, things would have been different. But they did happen the way they did. So if you hadn't had a big Icelandic volcano explode in 1788, you wouldn't have had the Great Hunger in France, because crops died. And if you hadn't had the Great Hunger, then the French government being bankrupt, had they had a few more years to recoup their fortunes, things might have been different when the next great trauma came along, whatever it was. But because that volcano erupted so soon after the American Revolution and the French government were bankrupt, they couldn't buy grain to feed the starving, which is what they normally would do. And so as a result, they were in a financial predicament, and the king had to call the Estates General, and the revolution went on from there.
So on and so forth.
And so on and so forth. Had they not intervened in the American Revolution, then they wouldn't have been bankrupt when the
Right.
volcano exploded.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah, yeah. That's true.
so it
Well, this is what I think makes history fascinating. Like I'm fascinated by history, but you're a historian, and I was struck by something that Shelby Foote said during. I don't know. Is Shelby Foote the Civil War historian? Is he still alive?
no.
Or no, he passed away. Okay, may he rest in peace. He seemed like a really good dude. Anyway, but he had an interview on C-SPAN years and years ago, and it was a great discussion. But somebody called, and it was a call-in program. They called in and they asked Shelby Foote. He says, it was about Gettysburg. What if such and such a general did such and such thing and actually defeated the North? And Shelby Foote said, I'm not a big fan of what ifs and what could have beens. He goes, as a historian, I deal with what happened.
Yeah, what was? Well,
And yeah, and what was. And
what
it seems to be something that makes a historian that way, is that they're not they're willing to accept what is.
well,
And
I mean, let me tell you that for as many historians that don't like what ifs, as many do, and it's the most popular game there is, it's basically a futile one though, because you can't tell,
yeah,
since
no,
everything we know is dependent on things working out the way they did.
right. It's
So
hindsight's 2020, right?
precisely right. So I mean, if Pickett had succeeded and broken the North, well, what would have happened? Who knows? Maybe Lee would have outrun his supply lines.
Right. You just don't know. But
Who knows?
okay, so on that point, I would like to. We're getting over an hour here. I'll finish up with you. First off, I appreciate you talking to me. It's been a real calming me down type thing. That there's still intelligence in the universe, and our
And
hair is not on fire.
I'm looking for it too.
You're looking for it too, and someday it'll get here.
Someday it'll get there. Lily Tomlin had a show, The Search,
Yeah, I remember.
and we have yet to find any, but perhaps when we do. So it's seriously though, the point I was going to make that I'm leading up to, and it's an important one. It's one I've made many times in other venues, but I think it's important for people to realize. Way back in 1972, when I was all of 12,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and then 73, we had Roe v. Wade.
Mm.
And I realized then that we were ruled by evil men.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that seems like a horrible thing to say, but you've got to bear in mind that at that time, the vast majority of people believed that abortion was murder, pure and simple.
Mm-hmm.
Abortionists were always portrayed in the movies and television as these horrible, filthy people.
Pariahs, right?
What's that?
Pariahs, which is what they are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a result, when this happened, I said to my dad, how could they do this, Dad? He said, oh, well, because they're evil. I said, well, they were ruled by evil men. And he goes, yeah, that's who rules us. And he said, and believe me, son, having fought for this country in World War II as a tail gunner, not my idea of a good time. I'm not happy about it. I said, well, what are we going to do?
Right.
And he said, we're going to do what everyone who lives under an evil regime does, the best we can. A lot of people in history have gotten through evil regimes, and they haven't enjoyed them, but they manage. I said, well, all right. Then a bit later on,
Well,
what's that?
go ahead.
Then a
Nothing.
bit
Go
later
ahead.
on, when I was in college under President Carter, I came to another realization. By that time, not only were they evil, they were insane.
It's
Now,
stupid. Yes.
not yet. You're getting there.
Okay.
Not yet, because it is a progressive thing. Well, progressive, it may not be the right word, but an
No, I get
evolutionary.
what you're saying.
They were insane. And when I say insane, I don't mean they think they were Napoleon. No.
Mm-hmm.
When a leadership group are insane, what it means is that they're so in love with whatever their ideology is that it's more important to them than even accomplishing their own goals. So, for instance, with the Germans, the Nazis in World War II on the Eastern Front, when they invaded the Soviet Union, they were greeted by children with flowers, and thousands of Soviet troops defected to them. Not just Ukrainians and all that, but Russians
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
defected to them. But then the Nazis in Berlin, you've got to have the mobile concentration camps. You've got to eliminate as many of the Untermenschen as you can, and suddenly there's a resistance. It was more important
Right.
to enact their racial policies than to win.
I got
And
it. No, I
why,
get it.
one of the reasons why Stauffenberg decided that Hitler really had to go was that he had been the liaison.
I'm
Von
sorry.
Stauffenberg, who was the chap that
Yeah.
tried to blow Hitler up in 1944,
Okay. All right.
he came to the conclusion that Hitler had to go because he was the liaison between the German army in the Eastern Front and General Vlasov of the Russians who came over. He was the commander of
Hmm.
the pro-German Russians. He saw defeat snatched from the jaws of victory
Right. This
because
is
of
what
the
Trump.
Nazi ideology. All right, so fast forward to the present. We are ruled by people who would rather see women in combat than win battles.
Right.
They would rather defund the police than
Transgenders. They'd rather see transgenders in the military than
they
have a
would
good,
rather
strong military.
they would rather lower the physical standards for the SEALs so that women can compete than have the SEALs really able to do their job. And they, how do I say this nicely? They would rather defund the police than have an effective security body to maintain their control.
Yeah, this makes no sense.
Well,
But they're insane and stupid.
it's insane. The stupid part I only came to realize under Mr. Obama. That was when I realized, you know, these aren't my grandpa's oligarchs. These guys are these guys are contemporary. They're what's now. They're what's happening. They're stupid, like everything else. And so therein lies both their great horror and, in a certain sense, our great hope. The certain sense is that they will overreach themselves.
They
I
always
have no
do.
doubt. Yeah, and I have absolutely no doubt out of the ranks of the deplorables, or at least using the ranks of the deplorables, we will get a Cromwell. The funny thing is, my dad wrote a movie script way back in '67 predicting this. And it's been chilling to see how that thing has come to pass.
Not too late to put it out there, Charles.
I don't think so. But it was
Yeah.
called The Return of Cromwell.
Well,
And
so
uh,
Cromwell was a big figure against Protestant figure against Catholicism, correct?
oh, yes. And I suspect,
In England, I mean, in England.
yeah, I mean, Cromwell was not a nice guy. And in my dad's story, what happens is that the United States have been involved in an Asian war for 10 years or something. Finally, the
Hmm.
war is over, and the Army of the Orient, as it's called,
Hmm.
comes home
Hmm.
to a very different country from the one they left.
Right.
They're demobilized, and the general, he goes home, and he finds that his wife is running around with somebody half her age.
Hmm.
He goes for a bit of spiritual solace to his parish church, only to find that it's a burned out ruin, and his pastor is wandering around half crazy. But it turns out that what happened was that two guys came to get married, and he refused, and they burned his church down. Well, a whole bunch of things like this occur, and finally he
Right.
says, "You know what? I've had enough." So he gets the old gang back together, gets the
Right.
band back together, and they march on Washington, and they take over. And then he begins to impose a very severe regime, and not in a nice way.
Well, that's the Trump mythology. That's exactly what people were believing Trump was going to be and do, especially on the Epiphany.
Which was anything but.
Right.
However, you've heard the phrase self-fulfilling prophecy?
Yeah.
I'll put this to you another way. In the wake of the horrible riots in the summer and the
Mm-hmm.
burning and looting,
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of literary and learned societies and educational institutions and government elements and museums, all sorts of cultural institutions of different kinds, came out in solidarity with Black Lives Matter,
Mm-hmm.
having variations on the theme. This is a country that was built on land stolen from the Indians, and the labor used in slave labor and all that. All the while, our cities are growing up in smoke. And every one of these things talked about an historical reckoning. And I thought to myself, I said, my little chillins, my baby munchkins, you're going to get an historical reckoning, I think, but not
Mm-hmm.
the way you think it's going to be. I mean, when I saw first the Confederate statues, and then the Columbus and Father Sarah statues, and then anybody who was on a pillar, getting pulled down.
Yeah, right, right.
I thought to myself, starting 5 years ago, in every way and any way I could, I came out against pulling down the Confederate statues.
Sure.
In 10 years, if I live so long, I will wager that I'll be arguing against pulling down the civil rights leaders' statues.
Hmm.
Because I suspect by then we will have an extremely different regime in this country, and one that will be, in some ways, extremely unpleasant. What it will be like, I can't tell because, and this is, you asked, can't there be good strongmen? Depends on how you measure good. The
Hmm.
thing about the problem with them is that they're entirely dependent on the personality of the leader and his quirks.
Hmm.
So basically, to the degree that he's good, or the degree that he's bad, to the degree that he's sane, to the degree he's nuts, whatever he is,
Hmm.
that is what will shape it. And I can't tell you what that is because I don't know the man. I have no idea who he is. Moreover, I can tell you this: if he's really into gardening and thinks he should be too,
Right.
well,
Guess
you
what?
and I are going to have an interest in roses and tulips we never had before. Gee, this is just the best thing I can do. And this will be a very hard school, but it may be that's what our country needs to go through. I don't know. I'm not God.
Well, right, and to your point, and this, you've said this before, and I was hoping against hope that we would get four more years of a chance to repent. But this country's never really repented from its evil. We've killed millions and millions of children in the womb legally. And
Yep.
as you said, Trump wasn't particularly hard on homosexuality. Um, there's 7 sins according to our faith that cry out to God for justice, or his wrath, so to speak. And we are pretty much up to our neck in all of them. But my wife and I, we made the comment though, I wasn't. I
Well,
mean, I'm not
you
saying I'm not a sinner and I haven't had my share of bringing things down. There's helicopters flying
that's
over
God.
Charleston.
That's God speaking to you.
No, it's helicopters.
That's what I said.
But anyway, so it's a kind of a wheat and tares concern I have. I understand that our country needs a nice body slam for all the things we've done and are continue to do. But on the other hand, I don't want me and my kids to get hurt. It's
Well,
hard.
neither do I. You know,
Right.
but it says in the Bible that the innocent, to the degree there are any, will suffer with the guilty. Then where do you
Yeah.
think the martyrs came from?
But
I
it
mean,
also says 1,000 will fall at your left and 10,000 at your right, and you will not be harmed. So this is the point. There seems to be a dual message that goes out during suffering. Now,
there
my
is,
only thought was that as a Catholic, we know that God will give us the grace needed to handle suffering when it comes. But
yes.
in our minds, we like to create the suffering before it gets here, and we may not have the grace to handle it in our minds, and it causes a great deal of trepidation in our heart. That's
Sufficient,
kind of where I was at.
sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Right
Right, and
now,
that's very hard.
you've still got 3 squares a day.
Yeah, no, I agree. I
It's the
understand.
it's still Epiphany tide. Mardi Gras is
Yes.
coming. Then Lent. Then Easter. Um, you got to roll with the punches. I mean, listen, sitting here in Central Europe,
Uh-huh.
these are people who, the older ones among them, have been through every kind of garbage you can imaginable. You can
Right.
imagine first under the Nazis and then under the Soviets. Um, they managed, and they're here. I mean, I grew up in LA. We knew tons of emigres that had been through all this garbage.
Hmm.
And yet there they were, smiling and laughing and leading lives. So the sad truth is, we may have some real horrors ahead of us. It may kill a lot of us, but life goes on. I mean, I've had people say to me, "Oh, how can I possibly have children in such a terrible world?" My response is the way our ancestors did during the Black Plague,
Right.
which is why you and I are here. Because, like, if they hadn't stuff, we wouldn't be.
Well, the more as we're talking, the thinking I had all day about it was I wanted to. You had to say, "Oh, I'm not going to give you absolution. I'm not asking for absolution, but I have this feeling that if I go ambivalent, or if I go into, all right, there's nothing we can do about this insanity. I'm just going to live my life and be happy. it seems like a sort of neglect on my part for my country. Do you see my
Well,
point?
let me put it to you this way. What's your alternative at the moment?
I don't have any alternatives. I can't.
Uh,
I can't move this wet noodle forward or backwards. I get
So,
that.
since you don't, and since you can't, you wait until you can, if ever you can. You wait. I mean, look, at
But
the
in our
moment,
waiting, in our waiting, do I allow? Am I allowing my enemy to creep to my doorstep when if I had been more? See, my. I think you know where I'm trying to go with this. If
I
I.
do, I do, and the problem is that you're trying to know all kinds of things you can't possibly know. That's why you've got to
True.
redouble your prayers that God
Yes.
illumine you and show you what to do when the time comes. But the truth of the matter is that life, in any case, is a game of blind man's buff for us because of our fallen
Mm-hmm.
nature.
Right.
You know, I may have told you this story before, and I know I've told it in many venues.
I don't mind. You can tell me over and over.
Another one of my dad's
So.
parables. But I think it's important to bear in mind, especially now, because it's true regardless of, if tomorrow we woke up and found out that, you know, some incredibly decent person had been elected president, better than the Trumpster, better than anybody else, and this has all been a terrible dream, that would be nice. But
Mm-hmm.
nevertheless, the story I'm about to tell you would still be true. And this is it. He said there was a wealthy Catholic man who made a lot of money, led a very moral life, was always faithful to his wife, raised his 6 kids very well.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all great credits to himself, his wife, and the church. He gave a lot of money to build churches and libraries and schools and hospitals. He was just a really, really good guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then he died. So when he died, he's at the gates, and St. Peter looks through his file and he looks through the paperwork, and he says, "Well, that's it. You're in." He says, "Oh, what a relief." He says, "Well, I've got a question for you, St. Peter." I go, "Sure. What is it?" What was the greatest thing? Like, what was my greatest accomplishment on earth? Was it the churches I built? They were great. We really appreciated them. What? The hospitals, the schools, all wonderful and our undying thanks. Well, what? The other things I did, they're all great. All right, St. Peter, I feel like there's something you're holding back. Tell me, what was my greatest accomplishment on earth? He goes, "You really want to know?" "Yes, I wouldn't ask you otherwise." "All right, I'll tell you. The hospitals, the schools, the churches, the libraries, all great. We appreciated it all. We appreciated very much your personal probity. It's actually what got you in here. But as far as your greatest achievement goes, I'll tell you. Do you remember when you were 14 years old and you were standing on the corner of Hollywood and Vine? The car pulled up and the guy rolled down the window and said, 'Hey, kid, how do I get to Sunset and Wilcox?' And you told him. And he got there just in time. And it all worked out the way it was supposed to. It was perfect. Everything happened just the way it was planned. That other stuff was great. But oh, that shining hour of yours when you were 14 and you gave that guy direct, that was your shining moment. The point being that things may appear in heaven rather differently to the way they appear to
Mm.
us.
Yes, I would
And
imagine
so
so. We
you
hope
have
so.
you have to remember that ultimately that's the game we're playing for.
Mm-hmm.
To live well and if necessary to die well. What should you be doing now? I don't know. I know you should be praying. I know you should be as
That I'm
kind.
doing.
I know you should be as kind as you can to other people, even if you don't
Mm-hmm.
particularly like them. I know you should try not to go insane or to be carried away by things.
Should I go? Should I remove my my public? Not remove my public. That's too strong. For instance, I'm going to be taking my Trump flag down. And the point is, though, should I go incognito until this blows over? And then by doing so, am I betraying what I believe?
Okay, well, firstly, I really can't advise you on that because I
Okay,
don't
well, I
know.
mean,
But
okay,
what I can tell you is, you're between the need to be prudent and the need to be brave.
right.
And these, Scylla and Charybdis. I'll tell you, the fellow that Alexander Trugel, the chap that threw the Pachamamas into the water,
Hmm.
he and I discussed it afterwards because he's a friend of mine.
Hmm.
And now he didn't talk to me about it.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. That's okay.
He didn't talk to me about it. Well, no,
Uh,
there's a reason for it. He said when we finally spoke, and when I saw the first videos, I thought, I know that guy. Something I didn't know who it was, but I
right.
know that guy. And then later when he came out,
Yeah.
oh God, it's Alexander, of course. Well, afterwards I said to him, uh, if you had come to me and asked me about it beforehand,
Hmm.
I'd have said you should be prudent. But of course, the problem is when you're my age, the boundary between prudence on the one hand and cowardice and laziness on the
It's
other,
close.
yeah, really close.
Thin
And he
close.
goes, that's absolutely right, which is why I didn't ask you. So I couldn't argue with
You're right.
that.
You're right.
But
I get your point, so I won't ask you that.
well,
It's
no,
just
what
something that's on my. I don't really have any
no,
grandfatherly or uncles to talk to about stuff like
here's what I will tell you. Your first interest in the immediate has to be your family.
yes. Well,
So
my adult children are grown now. Well, it's just
what's
me and
that?
my wife. My children are adults now, more or less, depending on how you
To,
define adult.
to the degree I was going to say, to the degree that any of us ever become adult now, I think adulthood stopped roughly the year I was born. But the
But I really do. I feel for any father now with little ones at home.
it's
I,
it's hellish.
I,
I
it's
would say
hellish.
that
Is right.
I would say, frankly, you might take the Trump thing down simply because I suspect he's something of a spent force anyway.
Right.
What was the other thing you had up there?
Oh well, I also have "Don't Tread on Me" flag and the Blue Lives Matter flag. I was considering to continue to fly those, but I'm not sure. Not with Madam Harris on the prowl. I'm not sure if it's prudent.
Well,
So
as I say, I would take down the Trump flag, not least because, frankly, old politicians are worse than old, cold mashed potatoes in the refrigerator. There's nothing sadder than you're driving along and you see a bumper sticker on the car ahead of you from an election 8 years ago, and you're like, yeah, well, you know,
well, what are those banners? What are those banners you got behind you? What?
oh, these. Well, see, I'm a sucker.
I
I
know what they are. We don't. But my point is
but
that
see,
I'm
trust
not
me.
ashamed of my Trump support. Frankly, I'm not ashamed of it at
Well,
all. I
then leave
mean,
it up, and don't worry.
well, you might see it back here soon. The flag
No,
instead of
that's fine. But no, seriously, it's what does it have your neighbors throwing rocks at you? I mean, every situation is different.
no, nothing like that. It's not that bad yet. I mean, who knows what's coming? That's my concern. But
I
I'll
I
let
would
that go. Just something like a bounce off you.
I would recommend you read a book. However,
Okay. Okay.
I would recommend everybody read this book.
Okay.
It's by a man called Kenneth Roberts, Roberts, Roberts,
Okay.
and it is called Oliver Wiswell. W
Oliver
I
Oliver
Oliver
Wiz.
Wiswell.
Okay.
Oliver is one word. Wiswell, Wiswell is another.
Okay.
Oliver Wiswell,
Okay.
which is the story of a loyalist kid in Massachusetts at the beginning of the Revolution. It's a novel. Kenneth Roberts
So
wrote a lot of novels.
fictionalized history or
Yeah, yeah, it's an
okay.
historical fiction. Now, Kenneth
Okay.
Roberts wrote a lot of that. He wrote Northwest Passage. He wrote Drums Along the Mohawk. But this one was done from the loyalist point of view.
Okay.
And the reason why I think it's important is to see how people who were on the losing side handled the first Civil War.
That's excellent. Yes.
And there's another book which is not quite so loyalist, but deals with the same issue by a man called James Boyd, Boyd, and it's called Marching On. No, I'm sorry, not Marching On. See, that's the sequel. Drums, Drums.
Okay. And that's that place where? What's that one?
That's in Colonial, North Carolina. Also at the outbreak of the First Civil War.
And he was on the losing side, so to speak.
Well, he wasn't, but his father was sort of.
Oh, okay.
And it
I think
showed.
you've nailed it, Charles. I think that's what's bothering me. I don't like being on the losing side of this thing. After all
Well,
the effort and all the prayers and all the hope and all the, like I said, using my phone like heroin for since November. I mean, all that invested, and it seems like I feel like a fool in certain areas too. But
that you've got to get rid of.
right.
That you've got to throw right out of your head. And also you've got to bear in mind that being on the losing side is no dishonor if the losing side is the right side.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, you pointed rightly to the banners behind me.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
That's
the
Carl,
Double
right?
Eagle of Habsburg, my own people's Carillon de Sacre-Cœur.
Mm-hmm.
We're a defeated people. I mean, defeated
Mm-hmm.
by ourselves, like the Irish.
Right.
Uh, but it doesn't change the fact that it wasn't always that way. And please God, it won't always be that way.
Right.
The thing is,
I feel so much better. You sort of you put words to what the trying is, and I'm not. It's not like I'm so arrogant and proud. I don't want to ever lose. I'm a poor loser. It's just that I feel I don't know how to. I just didn't think. I actually didn't think we were going to lose this thing. Frankly, that's one side of it.
well,
But
in other words, you've got disappointment.
yeah,
Well, let me tell you this.
I know. No, stop. That's not the biggest part of it. It's not the biggest part of it.
No,
It's
but you
like
know what?
it was hard to focus on building things when you think they're about to get burned down. You know what I mean? It's hard to focus.
It is. It is. As your and my great 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 grandfather said just after the Black Plague. Uh, well, you
Yeah,
know, when they saw 2/3 of their
I
neighbors
get it. Right.
die,
Okay.
they looked at each other and said, "Are we really going to do this thing?" You know, and our great 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 grandmother said to our great great grandfather,
Let's
"Yeah,
do it. Why
yeah,
not?
we're going to do it. Yeah, sure. What else are we going to do?"
What else you
So,
got to do?
of course, there are those of us who descend, whose all of whose families were wiped out of the Black Plague. None of my ancestors survived. They all died.
That's not true.
And ever since, they're all dead. Ever since then, it's been there have been generations of my family that have been barren.
All right, Charles. Well, listen, you've been hugely generous to me, and I pray God that we can get rid of this stupid COVID thing, so someday we can actually find a way to meet person to
That would
person.
be great. Eat and drink. And there are
On
certain taverns. Oh,
yes,
before
yes.
I forget, and this is as much for your watchers and listeners as it is for you.
Okay,
Very, very important. Now, you
okay.
know that in recent years, I have begun to explore the Midwest rather more than I had. I mean, I know the Northeast very well. I know Dixie. I certainly
What
know
through
the.
pictures you mean
Well,
when you
not
say
just that. I
explore?
mean, I've driven through it.
Oh, well, not
You
recently.
know, 3 years ago was the most recent time.
Okay,
But
all
yeah,
right.
through pictures and so on as well,
Yeah,
I've discovered something I did not know.
all right.
Now, I hope you're seated.
So, I think I am.
Here it is. Here it is.
All right.
Now, I had begun to really admire the Midwest over the past 10 years in frequent
All right.
trips for things like their churches, the church architecture, their
Mm-hmm.
courthouses. But I've come upon something. Look this up. As soon as you get off, you'll feel tons better. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Supper clubs.
What is it?
Supper clubs. CLUBS.
Sounds
Wisconsin.
familiar. I mean,
Well, it is because you think a supper club was a big deal in the cities of yore. My parents would go to supper clubs, before I was
okay.
around. You'd have dinner and dancing,
Hmm.
you know.
Hmm.
But these supper clubs are apparently a big thing. Wisconsin is the epicenter, but they got them in Michigan, Northern Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Minnesota. Supper clubs, the upper Midwest. And they're neon sign, steak, seafood.
And why do they have you so animated? What is it about supper clubs that has Charles up and going?
There's so many of them. And they're the kind of place that is dying where I live. I mean, there are very few.
Well,
Red
are they
Letter,
at people's homes or are they restaurants?
the restaurants, usually on a lake or on a mountain or something, but sometimes not. Uh, Killer cocktails, steaks as thick as your arm.
But you got to be a member.
No, the club
It's
part.
a club. Yeah.
It's not really. Anybody can go. They call them supper clubs.
Okay.
Look up Wisconsin supper clubs, and then do the same thing in Illinois, Minnesota, and all that. But Wisconsin is the epicenter. Now, it so happens that one of my cousins is a state assemblyman in Wisconsin, and my brother and I have not seen this guy in years, not since we were children. But I told Andre, I said, because he's got the same tastes in food and booze that I do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, neon sign, cocktails, steaks, seafood,
Classic.
red leather banquettes. Yes, indeed, exactly.
Yes, I'm with you.
Well, that's what these places are like in the main.
Ah.
So I said, Andre, we got to go out and see cousin Joel and go supper club to supper club.
Yeah, like a bar crawl, but for supper.
Yes, exactly. And the looks of it, we never come to the end of them. And I said, yeah, that's right. We never would. So look them up. I tell you, there's a whole subculture around them. I had no idea.
Well, do you think did they survive this COVID, or did they get shut down?
Well, to the degree anything. Well, listen, the apocalypse is coming sooner or later.
Could be
all right.
Don't
anticipate it.
All right.
It'll be here. Don't worry. I presume the best until you've got absolute reason to think otherwise. Right. Or go crazy, or die of terminal depression.
Well, when you mentioned the flags in the back there, it was kind of like the segue I was looking for, because you posted this, and I'd like to end our discussion here with this prayer that you posted, and it's the one for Carl.
Oh yeah.
Okay. That's why I was taking my hat off earlier, if you noticed.
All right. Well,
I don't pray
take it off
with my hat.
Take it off. I don't have it in front of me, so you can read it.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. The Lord Jesus Christ, the redemption you won for us, gives the world order and peace, which we too often refuse. Mercifully receive our work and prayer as an atonement for all injustices done against your most sacred heart, and against all religious and earthly authority through rebellion and war. May our prayers and sacrifices help bring peace to the world and atone the multiple injustices, indignities, and slander done against your servant, Karl of Austria, and bring him soon to the honor of public veneration as a saint. Amen.
Amen.
That gave me a lot of comfort when I read that, because it's perfectly timed.
That's kind of why I put it out there.